Good evening. I'm Dr. Basil Considine. I'm here from the ACU Online Writing Center, and today we're going to be talking about writing a book review presentation. And if you're thinking, uh, book review presentation, I don't think that's a thing. Actually, it is, because many trainings, whether we're talking a professional development workshop in a school, journal or article club, or other or institution within a healthcare facility, or a training seminar at your workplace, many of these use books as the basis of the presentation. And while certainly not presenting all that there is in the book, they are, by act of presenting it, saying, hey, this is something that we believe is worthy of your attention. Here are the things relevant to this thing we do, or that thing you do, that are most helpful and relevant. Here are extracts of that that are being presented, and my opinions on when and how that should be used. And that is essentially a book review. So, our objectives today, we're going to be pretty focused. We're going to talk about the principles that apply in book reviews as they appear in periodicals, which is a context that most people are familiar with, aside from perhaps a course assignment that asks you to write a book review. And these are aimed at providing this set of information to the readers who have particular interests, just as a group of teachers attending this professional development session, or the medical residents in the journal club, or the nurses who are completing their continuing education, all have their particular interests. And so by understanding what you should be presenting to the people you're interested in, regardless of medium, we'll go and look at the specific sample assignment drawn from HIED 632, and then we'll look at some principles for book reviews that are given specifically in presentations. So let's talk about those book reviews. Well, we have a webinar on that. Now, this webinar will delve into a different course assignment that has you writing a book review, and presents it, among other things, is if this was something you wanted to get published, for example, to expand your CV, if you work for an employer that gives you credit for that or gives you a financial award. I did work for one university that did give us a small stipend for each publication, which was a nice incentive to work on this. And also because it's something that helps you promote the kinds of things that you are interested in, that you believe that people in your field should be paying attention to. So, why read a book review? Well, that's a question that leads to what we're going to put into it. Because people read book reviews to broaden their knowledge base and their understanding of a topic. I have read, in some areas, many more book reviews than I've read the books themselves, because partly I'm trying to figure out, is this something that I want to read the whole book, or that the ideas are interesting, but that leads me in another direction, which is fine. Knowing that I don't need to spend all that time there is good. And sometimes I'll learn, oh, this is a follow up to this other book that I'll go and read as well. Now, it's also a good thing to keep up in your field. I can think of so many things that have changed in the field of, say, child rearing since I was a child, and that have also changed in education. And so by reading book reviews, you're able to see what the ebb and flow of ideas is, and sometimes decide whether you're going to update your practice or whether you're going to look further so you can understand, or have a conversation about whether this is appropriate for your group. And so if it's making you aware of something and leading you in a direction that builds on that knowledge, awesome. That's a successful book review. And of course, the determination whether to read some or all of it. Libraries will often look at book reviews to decide whether this is something that they want to purchase for their readers. And that brings us now to the core components of what should be in a published book review. We, of course, need to know what the book is, which is going to involve information like the title of the book, the author or authors, where it was published, and the publisher name, when it came out, number of pages. And because of the nature of academic publishing, it's actually not uncommon to have books that have been out for years, sometimes 5 or 6 or more, that are getting reviewed. And that's fine that this is saying, okay, well, this is still something that we think readers should know about. Number of pages gives you an idea of how much time you might want to invest in it, and also how in depth it might go. If it's a 60-page book on leadership, that might be something that you see fits much better within your group than a 1,200-page magnum opus. Not to saying that there might not be an audience for that, but that if you're looking at a group that is pressed for time, then that whole book may not be what they're looking for now. Now, besides that, usually you'll follow it with a concise summary of the content that answers questions like, well, what is the purpose? Like, who is this writing for? What is it designed to let you do or understand? Followed by, what does it contain? And this isn't just listing the chapters. In fact, usually it is not straight listing at the chapters, but summarizing what the larger core of the book adds up to, and does it have specific sections of interest or that deserve highlighting when we're looking at the big picture thing. So, for example, I recall a book on leadership where, yes, it talked about leadership, the philosophy of leadership, different models, but the larger part of it consisted of practical exercises to work on building team spirit as a leader. And so even though that wasn't something that was evident in the title, that was something that was highlighted in a review and actually made me think, oh, I know exactly the case where I would want to buy this book because it has these things designed for this class of stuff. It brings us to the, is there a need for this? It could be that it's not presenting new material, but it's doing it in a fashion that is more accessible to a particular audience or calibrated to a different audience and other things out there. It could be something where you say, well, this other thing does it better, which is your judgment and good for a reader to know. If we're talking about information that is being presented, say, in a healthcare setting, you might say, well, okay, they've proposed this, but we've looked at it and it's not really helping and it's more expensive, or it's not a cost-effective investment, so we're not recommending it at this time. Now comes your critical assessment, where you talk about what you believe is noteworthy, but what's special about this? What makes us want to pay attention to it? It might be something, it's nothing new, but it's written in such a good manner for your audience that you think that it was well worth paying attention to. And then ultimately, we want to have a recommendation for the target audience. Is this something that you would recommend they buy? And sometimes people just explicitly state this. Sometimes it'll be, oh, this is a must-have for people doing this, or this is very useful for this. And other times they'll say something like, oh, this is more of interest for hobbyists or for aficionados and not practitioners, which helps people decide, is this something they want to invest in more? More for comprehensiveness than discussion right now, we've included some guidelines for book reviews from the different periodicals. But since that's not the focus of our time now, we're going to pass by. You can pause the video and rewind as needed if you want to read those slides. We're going to go take a look at the assignment guidelines for this HIED 632 assignment. This is a retooled assignment for this class, if I recall correctly. And so we are looking at a presentation that asks you to read a book and present on it. So the instructions read, after completing your assigned reading, create a 6 to 8 slide presentation, not counting the title and reference slides, that includes an overview of the main ideas and at least 2 practical applications from this reading that you can implement to, in that case, foster spiritual formation in college students. Now, if we look at this and go back to the principles that we were talking about earlier, okay, obviously introduce the book that you're discussing, but an overview of the main ideas. Well, if we look at this list here, what is its purpose? What does it contain? Those are main ideas, the main ideas that you are highlighting here. Now, you might be taking a more, we'll say, generalized look. You might be looking at it from the perspective of a particular audience. And so what stands out as the main themes may be different from, say, the chapter organization in the book. But we see, okay, at least two practical applications from this reading that you can implement. So that's looking at the question of what is noteworthy and what is useful, which are very important things to do if you are presenting something to a group. Presumably it's something that you think is noteworthy for them, but how is it useful? That is something that is very helpful to outline how or where or why something will be useful to that specific audience. All right, now if we look at this, it includes some recommendations to make this look professional, don't have too much text, and to consider adding pictures for the benefit of the audience and presenter notes for your benefit to make sure that you cover different things, because you shouldn't just be reading the slides text off there. You should be presenting a concise extract or using those as glues or anchors for discussion, and then adding more. If we look at the rubric, it is more or less following what the assignment said earlier, and we'll just keep an eye on that 6 to 8 slide length. The 6 to 8, which if we add the title and reference slides, we're talking 8 to 10 slides total. So let's now talk about what some of the principles are for presenting information from a book in a presentation. Well, we'll start with some general presentation principles. If you want to be focused, only incorporate and discuss the most important points. There's going to be a lot more in that book than you can give in 5, 10, 15, 20 minutes. By the way, a good rule of thumb for most presenters, about 2 minutes per slide is about right. There are some things that you might go through faster or slower, but if you're trying to estimate how long your presentation will be, 2 minutes is a good starting point. And then you can time that and see where you are after you have refined the exact content there. Only to incorporate and discuss the most important points. Stick to a basic aesthetic or color scheme. So don't have, a different color on each line, but coding certain lines that are related by color might be helpful. But just be consistent about how you do it. Don't use red to mean important on one slide and not important on another. Also, make sure to use visual design. If you're giving a presentation, you have access to visuals most of the time these days, and you don't need to print out transparencies. You don't need to arrange props on a projector. You can prepare your slides, and you have access to images that may make things easier to understand, that are more memorable, that concretize things. You also want to know your audience. What are they most interested in? And what do they most need? If someone's spending time to come to your presentation, what do they need? And to help acknowledge the fact that this is a time compressed presentation, you want to give executive summaries. Give a brief introduction to the key details. Tell the reader what is this book as a whole, and what are those elements that are most of interest. We don't want to put everything in the slides. Death by PowerPoint is a slogan for a reason. We want to focus on the most important things that will help reviewers retain this, whether it's things that they're copying down for future reference or things they're flat out trying to remember. We don't want to be in a situation where you're just reading the slide text. People will usually read faster than you can, so it's that adding additional information or using that as a glue to organize the information that you're telling them that is most helpful. You also don't want to add visuals just for the sake of adding. I went to a presentation once where people kept adding pictures of baby sea otters. Now, I'm not saying that baby sea otters aren't cute, because they are, but they were distracting from the presentation, and they were there more to fill up space and time because the presenter didn't know what else to do. And I will say that if they had given us that time back, or just moved all the baby sea otters to the end of the presentation or the slide when people walked in, then people could look at it without it distracting in the middle, trying to understand, incorporate, and remember the material being presented. It's also a great idea to build in some sort of interactivity, something that makes people think, even if it's not something where you have time in the presentation for them to say it aloud. This could be something like posing a question before you give the answer and letting people think about that for even 30 seconds before you give them the answer or give them the key thing that the book is bringing to the conversation. It's also super helpful to either have a review built into the session or give some materials, perhaps a set of key points at the end. It could be a series of questions, could be multiple choice, could be a link to do a quiz later, but something that lets people review and consolidate the information, because that really does make a difference in how it's retained. Now, here's an example structure. If we're counting this, you'll see that there are 10 slides here, intro and reference, and then I happen to have broken it down into 8. Depending on the book and depending on the audience and their needs, you may have fewer than this. Probably not going more for this particular assignment, because they did say 6 to 8 plus the title or intro slide and the references. But if we look through this, the hook is what grabs people here. And this is something where if you have something that makes people say, oh, yeah, I'm interested in that. It could be a mystery, a question that's posed that will be answered later. It could be an anecdote that grabs their attention. It could be presenting statistics about a problem, something that makes them invested in what you're presenting, even before we get to that outline where you say, here's the stuff that I'm going to go through in the order that I'm going to do it. And then if you're summarizing a book, then you want to have that key summary where you give the most important things that people should know about it. Usually there's some sort of discussion of the chapter list that's on the table of contents bullet right now, this one here, because it may be pertinent to point out, oh, here's how the information is organized, with it the goal of pointing out things that people might be specifically interested in, because books, a lot of people don't read the whole thing cover to cover. Often they're going looking for something very specific of interest and continuing from there. The main areas, so this could be summarizing the chief content of the book. It could be about the applications to your particular group. I was recently reading a book on the medical residency process, which is for US medical students a source of no small amount of stress as they try and figure out how to plan to shape a algorithm's decision on where they go based on what they and programs they've applied to have selected. And so if I was presenting on that book, there's some historical background information in there that, it's helpful to know and understand how things got the way they are. But if I'm giving a presentation on here's what you should do for the residency application process, that's probably not something you're going to be focusing on, because it's not one of those main things that people are focused on. They don't need to know, oh, back in 1965, here's what it was. Again, good for historical interest and understanding why things are the way they are. But if we're focused on, okay, let's do this specific task, then I'm going to be highlighting different things there. What goes into the introduction slide, you might have the book information there. if there's something else that you reference, like you're saying, oh, this goes well with something else, then you might be listing that in your reference slide as well. But the introduction slide will generally be your first opportunity to shape people's perceptions of how they're interfacing this and what things they pay attention to. So think about how you might title that presentation and what else is going on the introduction slide. For things where they present details like your name and your credentials or initials, I like to put that in the intro slide because I don't want to spend time in the presentation listing that when people can read it just fine. Same thing with my email address. I'll put it on there, but I won't read it out because people can read it fast enough if they are interested in, and generally distributing a copy of the slide deck anyway. So that brings us to a close for this presentation. I encourage you to email us if we have any questions at onlinewritingcenter@acu.edu. You can schedule an appointment by going to my.acu.edu and selecting from the drop-down list of resources or quick links, selecting Online Writing Center and following the instructions. And you can always visit the Online Writing Center website. That's it for this evening. Have a good night.